class, now we begin lecture 1 on Hinduism. I want to warn you ahead of time, Hinduism is very much different to anything that you have conceived in the past. We take certain things for granted in the West. Here you're going to have to shift completely. I will give you several examples of what that looks like. But Hinduism has been the longest lasting and most enduring religion. So we have a history of about 4,000 years with tremendous contributions by great minds like Shankara and Ramanuja. So I'll take you step by step through Hinduism, and given the vastness of it and given the complexity and how counterintuitive it is for us as Westerners, I have assigned 2 weeks of work on Hinduism. So we'll have several lectures on it just to walk you through to be able to internalize knowledge. So if you find yourself, and this has been my experience in the years that I've taught religion, if you find yourself kind of keeping up with it but hardly making sense of it, being quite confusing in your mind, not yet be able to connect with it, don't worry, that is a typical response to Hinduism. Now once you go through the entirety of it, I hope that then it flows very organically, and it is just evident, and you can make sense of the whole system. So it will take time, it will take some headaches, it's going to stretch you in ways that you have not been stretched in regards to religion, but in the end it will be very gratifying. Here you have an example of a world religion that has become an enduring civilization that is still being practiced today, who has a number of adherents of about 1 billion people. So that is quite a remarkable enduring achievement that we have. Just to compare with that, we have 1 billion people following this system of belief for over 4,000 years. The United States has only been in existence for close to 250 years. So it's about a 16th of the time or further, a 48th of the time that Hinduism has been around. So keep that in mind as we continue on in this process. So one thing that I want to note is spend this lecture describing to you the historical roots of Hinduism. So Hinduism, the Hindus did not label themselves Hindus. So that was a label that arose out of Alexander the Great in his conquest, pushing eastward. He, of course, conquered Persia, Greece, then Persia, and then he continued on in a campaign that lasted 10 years until the limits, and he passed the Indus River, and so there was the land of the Hindus, and that's the name that stuck, and over time it has remained that way, and somehow the region of India and the Indus River, we're combining into this idea of Hinduism, and it has remained that way. So for all practical purposes, we will continue describing it in this way. Now, if you come across a Hindu person, they may describe themselves as a devotee of a specific god or goddess. So they may not say, I am a Hindu. They may say they are from India and they are a devotee to Bhakti or any other given deity that they may have in mind. So just think of that, keep it there. Now, Hinduism, if you look at the diagram in the Prezi, and I hope you're looking at it, otherwise it's difficult to follow. If you look at the diagram in the click number 65, so you can fast forward, you're going to see Hinduism, which has two blocks on the top, and then they converge and become one, and then there are subsequent points. Now, the reason why that happens is because Hinduism was the merger of two cultures coming together. One is going to be the Drahvidians, and the other one is the Aryans. And I will explain each one of them. Each one brought their own contributions to what we know as Hinduism. So the merger of them is what is known as Hinduism. So I'll go ahead and click on the Drahvidians. Now, the Drahvidians were a group of people. They were the first settlers in the area. They were the ones that developed the foundations of civilization. So if there is one thing to remember about the Drahvidians, is that they were the one that laid the infrastructure. And second, they are going to develop the caste system. and that's going to be incorporated into Hinduism. But the Dravidians lived there for about 1500 years, quite an extensive period of time. They were not known until about the 1920s. I mean, I say unfortunately, there was a famous historian at the time who decided to write this archaeological development. It was a 6-volume or so study on the history of India, and his own group ended up discovering the cities, the Mohenjo-daro, that dated Hinduism or the Drahvidians from 1500 to 3000 BC. So when his work was completed, which would have been the work of many years of research, then they made this discovery a week later. So that I would have hated to be that scholar. But nonetheless, now we know that there was this vast civilization. I will show you certain components of that and give you some visuals. And in approaching India, of course, think of the Hindus in India and the vastness that India represents. I mean, unfortunately, we're not close to them in geographical proximity, therefore we don't tend to think much about what goes on there. But India is just you can almost look at it as an archipelago or a constellation of different small tribes combined into this massive landmass. In India, you have a very great disparity of very still undeveloped communities that are still having practices and speaking a language that was quite antiquated to us, and dialects of their origins. And then, of course, you have those who speak English after the British came into the scene. They didn't have a written language per se that was universally through all of India. The unification of India came out of external forces like the Alexander the Great and the Greeks going and conquering, and then the British ended up there and kind of standardizing and normalizing things. But India is has a vast geographic location. They are also their physical complexion and sociological distribution is quite noted in the history of India. And so the Drahvidians, which are going to be the original settlers, are going to be mostly the people that settle in the southern part over time in India, and the Aryans are going to be more Caucasian looking. And so one is going to have a darker complexion, which is the Dravidian origins, and then the Aryans, which are going to be lighter skin. So yes, if Aryan sounds familiar, these are the quote-unquote Aryans that Hitler was alluding to, the Aryan race per se. Some of them went to Ireland, some of them went to Iran, that's where Aryan, and then some of them went to India. So keep that in mind as we proceed on, and please set aside any of that racist connotation in regards to the subject. Just know that there was a group of people that lived there of lighter complexion. That was it. So if you look at the geography of India, and I provided you with several pictures and illustrations of what this is, the Indo-Australian plate and India, the limit of the geography of India is going to be to the north, to the Himalayan mountains. So that's a natural limitation that you have there. India is going to be the subject of much variation in climate, and also I believe it has one of the most rain areas in the world, where you have a dozen or more feet in just a matter of a few days that fall upon India. So you have a lot of rain during the monsoons, and then very cold winters because of the Himalayan mountains. So it's a very peculiar location there. But if you look at the maps that I provided there, there is a map of the plate tectonics. There is a map that speaks about the 4 river civilizations. So it's good for you to know those. I'm sure you encountered them before. And that is the culture of Mesopotamia, which began with the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, and then you have Egypt, which of course it is quote unquote the gift of the Nile, and then you have the Indus River, which is going to be the the one in which the Drahvidians settle, and then of course then you have the ancient Chinese civilization with the Jiangxin River, and those are the quote-unquote four river valley civilizations. So when we come into India, the term map that I provided, on the northwest part of India is where this civilization of Harappa was located. Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. And as I mentioned, they were only discovered about 90 years ago. And so what you have there is, what we have from discoveries of that area is just a few things, and there is not much that we can make out of it other than try to speculate on it, but no archaeologist has any clear sense of what they mean. They have bath rituals, and you can see the city. It's a very well laid out square city with this bath locations where people could walk on both directions into it. And we know there were baths because in Hindu temples they continue to use that same design. So some of the temples have it on the outside of the temple. But outside of that, we don't know anything much about them. What we do know is that they were very meticulous in the development of the city, and that they had toilets, and that the layout and infrastructure was quite superb, and it will not be matched until the Romans, quite some time later. And then they left us a few somewhat coins with figures on them, and some of them were animals of course. Some of them were, of course, human beings with exaggerated genitalia, like it's a common. But there is a very peculiar one that has a person in a position, the lotus position of meditation. So we still don't know what any of those inscriptions mean because it's not a written language that we have been able to codify. But they developed that. And so as a culture, that's as far as we are able to make sense of. Laid the source of the foundations for culture, but the infrastructure, it was quite massively distributed. They had these coins or figurines that they used for exchange, and then the bath. And at this point, I will ask you to scroll down a little bit on that same square and read what's called the sacrifice of Purusha. Now, this is going to be crucial because as you read, and you can pause the video right now, as you read, I want you to keep in mind how easy of apprehension it is. It is something that you can tell to your 5-year-old and he will quickly follow what's going on. I could tell it to my 3-year-old and I believe he will do quite well following it. It is a very simple story of creation and of origin. And I want you to keep that in mind because when we come to the Aryan's account of creation, then you'll see a very different contrast. And so, what you have in Purusha is, of course, one deity called Purusha that was sacrificed and cut into pieces, and then everything in the world was made out of Purusha. So it's a form of what you call pantheism. Pan meaning all, theism meaning God. All is God, so everything has a spark of the divine in it or an expression of the divine. And Hinduism, of course, it's a religion that believes that all is eternal, and as such, then all is spirit. And in this case, Purusha was the substance. The substance is the underlying reality. Like when I touch the table that I am leaning my hands against, it's made out of stuff, and this stuff is matter. So the substance out of which these things are made is matter. Even though it is wood that I can see, it looks like oak, red oak. But in any case, that is the substance. Purusha is the thing out of which everything else was made. So I want you to think about that. I will, in the next video, explain the different parts of Purusha, as well as the different caste system and how it operates in Hinduism. So at this point, read the sacrifice of Purusha, and note very importantly that the Drahvidians were the ones that laid the foundation for civilization in Hinduism. Okay, we'll see you in the next lecture.